Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, we have a guest who is going to teach us all about legends in the wintertime, some Cree storytelling. We have with us today Kurtis McAdam Saysewehum from Big River. Hi, Kurtis, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a little cold where I am. It was minus 38 this morning, but it's starting to drop again, so it's warming up. Yeah, I'm doing
Yeah.
good.
It is really cold, but it's a good time for storytelling. So I was happy when you reached out and you were willing to share some legends. I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit of background on where you learned them or
Okay, we can start there. I grew up in Big River First Nation, and then eventually my parents started taking me out to the land, and it was a trapline where my grandparents had a log cabin, and that's where they hunted. And so a good part of my winter was spent out in the bush, and really there's nothing else to do out there except go hunting and tobogganing and getting to know the land. And in the evenings they would tell stories to us, and eventually that carried on to my home. And when I was done out in a trap line, then we'd go home and back to electricity and running water and all that. And my parents would, what they'd do is in the evenings, they would turn off all the power, turn off all the lights, and they would put a candle in the middle of the living room, and they would have us sit on the floor, and we would make a semicircle. There was 6 brothers at the time, and we would all sit there, and of course, you know how kids are, we would poke and tickle each other and while they're telling the stories. So we were doing that, and that was my first introduction to storytelling, is when the grandparents and my parents began talking about it that way. And some of the stories were about the bears, the environment, the wind, some of our sacred items that we use in ceremonies. So eventually, from storytelling, my parents, they started talking to us about the virtues of the storytelling, what the virtues we were supposed to learn from them, the values, and how we apply them when we go into ceremony. So when they started asking me to help them in around sweat lodge, for example, I started making them, and I started helping with the pipe more and getting the sacred items ready. And I kept doing that for several years, and eventually I started asking as a little kid, what does the pipe mean? How come it always has to be on the ground? Why do we start with the sweat lodge and making it this way? Why do we always have to do it southeast, the door? Things like that. I was just starting to wonder, because when I was doing that, I wanted to make things my way, and I was quickly told you can't do that. So again, it followed up with the story, why everything is in a sequence the way it is. And I tried to do things counterclockwise, and I was told to never to go opposite from the sun. And again, there was another story to that too. So everything had a story. And when I was learning those stories, I was learning laws too, our Indigenous laws. Sometimes when you're being told stories, the safest way to learn some of the mistakes we do each day is hearing the mistakes from other people, and that opens, discussion, I guess, with family members, and you socialize in a different way when you do that. Like, for example, some of the siblings I've got, sometimes when we go on car rides, we talk about, do you remember that story when we were told those things? And then we start to take that apart and we analyze it. Then one day I was sitting in a living room with my mom, and I was thinking about stories and the different stories in the world, including Egypt and biblical forms of stories. And then I was thinking about, they have gods, they have angels, and what do we have? So I asked my mom, I was sitting at a table, and I said, what is Atayuhkan? What kind of spirit is that? I said. And then she told me, it's not a spirit, it's a story. So what she was trying to say at the time, but she didn't know the word, was it's mythology. So I guess, when you look at Zeus, that's their mythology. When you look at the Bible, that's their mythology. So when you talk about Atayuhkiuna, when you do that, you're actually doing a ceremony. The moment you start talking about creation stories, you're doing a ceremony. And I remember too, they used to take me off reserve too to other elders, and they would sometimes just make a special trip for me to learn a story. So I would go to this elder's home, and again, we would sit in a semicircle, and I had to light up the sage and smudge everybody, and then I sat down, and then I gave them protocol, and I asked them questions, and then they would tell me. So anytime you talk about creation stories, you're supposed to light up a smudge, and if you're asking somebody about doing creation stories, you're supposed to give them tobacco, and if you want to give them other protocols, that's up to you too. So going back to that Atayuhkiun, that word mythology, when she said that, there was more bells that went off in my head, and I thought, so the pipe is Atayuhkiun? And she goes, yes. A rattle, the drums, sweetgrass, and go, yes. And then I started to think about all the sacred items in a sweat lodge, and I thought, all those are Atayuhkiun. What about the sweat lodge? I thought, yes, even that, they said. And then it got me thinking, what is the first pipe? Where did it come from? Where did the first sweat lodge come from? The rattle, the drum. What about the first song that was ever gifted to us as Indigenous people? All those questions started to come into me. And, not one person has all the answers. So it came to a point in my life where I ended up working for FSIN in Saskatchewan here, and they hired me to record elders to try and get stories of Indigenous laws. So I traveled through different communities and I recorded elders, and I got to know them pretty good. And a lot of them, I found out I'm related to them too. So they started talking about different types of stories, and it wasn't just about our sacred items. They talked about laws, animals, and the environment. And then it went on to prophecies, like what's going to happen in the future. That one always scares me when I start thinking about it, what's going to happen in the future. And then I asked them, did we always have these items? Did we always have them? And they said, no, we didn't. These began after the Great Flood, they said. And most of the stories that I've learned start from there. And I asked them again, it's like, what did we have before then? And they said, we didn't have those kind of items back then. We never needed them. People had really strong belief and faith that they didn't need them. So I started looking into these sacred items, and I thought, what are they for then? What's the purpose of the pipe, the rattle, the drum, sweetgrass? What's their purpose? And they said they were human one time. The purpose of the pipe is to speak for us. He's the only spirit that has direct connection with Creator. That's the only one that has direct connection with Creator. I was thinking about that too. How is that possible? I was thinking about all these things. There's the scientific part of me that says it's impossible to turn a person into a human. And those things I really, really wanted to know if they were true. So I began traveling again, going to different ceremonies. And then they told me a story. I'll share this story. It's a Wisahitak story. There were two men that followed Wisahitak. They were two warriors, and they heard he was making changes. So they wanted to be a part of that. And so they heard Wisahitak was going that way. So they followed him. And at the evenings, they could hear a man singing from a distance, and they knew it was Wisahichak. So they kept riding all day long. They would ride as fast as they can to try and catch up to Wisahichak. Sometimes they would get so close, they could hear him just so close, they think they're right there. And when they woke up in the morning, he was far again. They did that for about 4 days. And on the fourth day, they caught up to him. He was sitting on a rock as though he was waiting for them. And Wisahichak, all this was told to me in Cree, though. And he said, Kigwayu mintawihtamik, what do you want? Why are you following me? That first warrior got out of his horse and he said, Ipihta mahuma hukuiskasta in Gigwaya, Simantu nuhteatoskoat nisnan. He said, we heard that you're here to make changes, and I want to work for Creator, but I also want to live forever, is what he said. And Creator put a law that we cannot live forever in our human form. So Wisahichak stood up and he said, okay, you can work for Creator and you will live forever, he said. And then he changed that man into a rock. And the other warrior, he looked at him and he said the same thing. Why are you following me? That warrior got off his horse and he said, I want to help Creator too, and I want to live forever too, is what he wanted. So Creator said, you will work for Creator and you will live forever. That man, he changed him into a raven. So, I heard this story one time. I only heard it from one person. And I went to this place. It's a ceremony. It's a special ceremony. And they talked about how that happened. Nobody else could have known that story except that person that told me. And they talked about that. And I thought, how did you know? And the crazy part is that Raven was the one talking. And he said, I was the one that was changed. I'm here to help mankind, humans, until the end of time. That's my job, is what he said. He was the one talking. And these are the stories sometimes I go around and I share with people. And raven is one of the birds. When you go around all over the place, you'll see the raven. They're always watching us on the roads, on the trees, and the rock. In Cree, we call it Xi na Piu Asini. Xi means first, na Piu is male, Asini is rock. First male spirit. That's what it means. And his job is to speak for us using the pipe. And a lot of our laws are connected with that, in that pipe. One day I was filling up the pipe for my dad. And these elders were gathering around just before a sweat. They were going to smoke the pipe. Actually, they were done. And I was sitting outside. And then I was done. I went and sat away from them. I sat on a stump looking at just the sky and minding my own business. And my dad looks at me and he says, are you hired in the pipe? And I looked at him. What do you mean? No, I said. Then why are you sitting on that? You're supposed to be sitting on the ground. So I got up and I ran towards them and I sat beside them and I sat with them while they were smoking the pipe. What he meant is nobody's above the pipe laws. When you sit on a chair like that, that means you're indicating I'm better than people. I'm above the pipe laws. That's what it means. So certain behaviors I've learned over the years that you do, you cannot do. Even like the movements that you do in ceremony become prayer. Gagi semo. That means, Gagi semo. Forever in prayer movement. That's what it means. Gagi semo. If you were to ask anybody that today, they would say, you're supposed to pray. That's what it means. But that's only half of it. It means forever in prayer movement. So what you learn in ceremony, verbally you're supposed to express it, behavior-wise, you have to exhibit that in your community, in your family, in everybody you interact with. That's what it means. You know, when we look at our Cree words, they're very powerful and they have teachings behind it. Just like in English, if I said, "What is your name?" you would tell me Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
And if I said it in Cree, I'll say the same thing in Cree. Dan se gitsiga sun. What is your name? But what I'm really saying is, what is the name gitsiga sun? What is the name of your belly button? It sounds silly, I know it does, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you think about that, what I'm really saying is, who is your family lineage? That's what I'm saying. So
Mm-hmm.
your umbilical cord, who is it connected to? And then you'll say my mom. And who's your mom's umbilical cord connected to? Like that. That's what it means. So our words are very powerful. And when they say they're spiritual, they are spiritual. In the summertime, one time I woke up really early in the morning, and I don't know why, but it must have been a purpose. And I went outside, and my dad was sitting there already. I was doing a few things outside, and I was going back in, and then I heard a bird. You know, the bird, the way they whistle. And as I was about to open the door, my dad goes, "Do you know what that bird just said?" And I go, "No, I don't." "Listen to it." So it does it again and again. And I told him, "I still don't understand what he said." "This is what he said." He looks at me in frustration. I'm looking at him. He said, "One sky guy wing is 6 months to kananas Mike." He said that in Cree. To translate that, it means, "Wake up now. Don't forget to give thanks to the Creator." That's what that bird said, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that they're talking to us, people, because we were out there, but it wasn't us they were talking to. You see, the vibration of that bird, the way it whistles, travels into the world and into the universe. And when it vibration hits the ground, the plants, what they do is, if they're not open, they start to slowly turn over and then they blossom. They open. And that's their way of talking and communicating with Creator and giving thanks for the day. The
Mm-hmm.
vibration of the bird is very important in the mornings. It wakes up the rest of the plants and the animals to begin movement and to give thanks to the Creator. Those kind of stories, you know. And then I looked into that about vibrations. What
Mm-hmm.
science has found is just amazing. And, you know, your DNA and my gene, they're connected to the plants and the animals. That vibration, just like that rattle, you know. When if you ask somebody, what is that rattle for? We use it to sing and we use it to heal people. That's just the surface teaching. What it means, that rattle is, it creates the vibration to heal you. And that vibration mimics the sound of the universe. That's what it's called. Si guan. Si we no. That's what it means, the vibration, you know, they just going. Si guan. It's vibrating the sound of the universe. So when you use it in a sweat lodge, for example, you're mimicking the sound of the universe. And that sound is the first sound Creator makes, and it's eternal. It travels in the universe all the time. It's all around us. And every living being and every living plant and earth and planet in the world mimics that vibration. That includes the sunlight. When the sun travels in the universe, it's vibrating the sound similar to what the Creator had done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking quite a bit. I stop. You got any other questions?
No, that's good. I'm enjoying it.
So, you know, when our culture, and it all started just from that pipe and those rattles and those drums, they do the same thing too. And then the eagle, if you ever see the eagle feathers in our lodge, that represents Ogemau Pisu. To translate that is not right, but the closest I can translate it to in English is the King of Thunderbirds. That's what it means. There's a female Thunderbird too, and
Hmm.
she's the boss of all the female Thunderbirds in the universe. And those ones, sometimes people don't give thanks to those beings, those spirits. We call those ones Ukisiguak, the ones that live where the blue sky, that's where Gisiguak is. You know, the more good things you do in this world, Gituskotem Gituistamagun. Your soul light will become bright and it'll speak for you. The more good things you do. You know, when you think about it, when the thunderbirds travel in the summertime, they cause rain, they give nourishment to the plants. When you look at them when they come in the springtime, their lightning goes through all over the sky and they're rumbling, the vibration. You know, Creator gave us that same light in our body. That's why we know when some people have a heart attack, they have to put that defibrillator and zap them back. They have to borrow electricity to put it back into our body. That's how our bodies are too. When people don't live right, then they do the opposite of what Creator intended us to be. That light doesn't travel through your arms very well and your legs. Circulation is then affected, and that's why sometimes our legs create arthritis or something like that. Sometimes you have to make amends of the things that we have done and fix that part of our health so that electricity that can go through your legs properly. So you have to heal yourself. When people say you have to heal yourself, Kanatawiswin in Cree, you have to heal yourself. That electricity has to flow through your body the way it flows in the skies when the thunderbirds move. You know, a lot of times people get sick. That's the reason why, is sometimes we make mistakes in our life. The biggest teachings I ever had, the one teaching that stood out for me, actually there's two of them. I posted one of those stories, but the other one I didn't in Facebook.
Hmm.
It was a story my dad shared with me. He was raised by his grandparents, and his grandparents lived it. They lived the culture, they breathed it, everything was about culture for them. And you know, the one thing I always asked my dad was, who did you learn it from? I've always wanted to know the authenticity of the story and the person. That was important to me. It's getting it directly from the source. So once I knew it was authentic, then I listened with great interest. And when my dad talked about living out in the land, he said, it's amazing. I lived walking. When we wanted to get one place to another, we had to walk. And then we had sled dogs. Then we had horses. We were traveling one time from, they call it Stony Lake to Big River, and it was a 2-day trip. And we're on a wagon, and we took our time. We stopped and ate and made fire. That one day, he said, we were eating, and my grandpa was done. He called them abstinis. It means little man. He was named after little people,
Hmm.
abstinis. So anyways, he said, he was done. I seen him pick up a fair-sized rock and he put it in front of him. And on the side, he pulled out a knife. And he took the knife and he started cutting that rock as though it was a loaf of bread. Like he made slices out of it, he said. And then he stopped and he kind of sat back looking at it. And then I was in amazement. Kept looking at the rock and my grandfather, he said. So I jumped up and I grabbed the knife and I tried to do the same thing, but I couldn't do it, he said. My grandfather just kind of chuckled and sat back looking at me. And then I looked at my other grandfather, he said. he picked up a moose leg and he snapped it like a twig. And I was sitting there listening to him. I thought, that's impossible. He said, I know, but I seen it with my own eyes. He said, this really happened. You know, my dad had incredible stories, but I know stuff like that he would never make up. Because in our Cree culture, stories like that, you're not supposed to tell people stories that can mislead them, because that's part of the law. If you mislead people, then you're breaking a creator's law, a Cree law. So I sat there, I was thinking about that. And then, of course, later on, after he was done, I asked him, how did they gain that ability? How did they do it, is what I started asking him. So he briefly told me about his upbringing with them, the way he was raised. And he said, sometimes at night when I'm sitting with my grandfather, the one that has helpers of little people, when I'm sitting with him by the fire in the log cabin, it's quiet. I hear drumming and I hear people singing in the distance. And I would ask him, who are those? He said, those are the little people. They're making medicine now, is what he was told. And sometimes they had visits from them. My grandfather, those were his spiritual helpers. He was named after them. And he was a master and an expert at making different types of herbs that can heal people that had different types of ailments. So my dad, I would always ask him about his teachers, because what he witnessed and what he saw from them in the land. This one time he was sharing with me, they were out in the land, and this lake that he's talking about, it's miles long. It must be about 20 miles wide. And he said, we walked across that lake, and when we got almost in the middle, he said, we heard wolves. And we looked back, and we could see them in the shorelines, and they were coming after us, he said. Him and his uncle, he was with his uncle. He said I was a kid, and my uncle was in his 40s, I think he said. And then we said, let's start running. So we started running to try and make it to our cabin on the other side of the lake. And we ran as fast as we could. And the wolves were quite a ways out from the shoreline from where we were, he said. They caught up to us in no time, he said. As they were getting closer, my uncle said, stop here. So we dug a hole in the snow, and we put all our bullets in there, he said. Now you face that way, and I'll face this way, and you just keep shooting at those wolves, he said. They didn't know which one was the alpha wolf, and the wolves caught up to them. And they would take their bullets and load up their guns, and the wolves would circle around them. They kept circling around them. He said, every time I was going to shoot them, it's as if they knew. They would jump up, and I would miss them. This happened for quite a while. The wolves were circling around us. They were going to kill us and eat us, he said. And they would come really close to us. And then my uncle, I don't know how he knew it, he said, but he found the alpha male and he shot it and killed it. The moment he killed it, all the wolves ran away. So we grabbed whatever bullets we had left and we ran as fast as we could to our cabin. And once we made it there, we were safe, he said. You know, growing up hearing that in a living room with the lights off, you picture that in your mind, how the wolves act, the sounds they make, the growling, the bites they make. I imagined it as though it was a TV in my head. You know, you think about that. What does that do to a kid growing up in their teenage years and then into their adulthood? The type of critical thinking you start to develop from hearing stories. Stuff like that, you know. You grow up a little bit different from the rest of the kids. You grow up talking different, behaving different, and thinking different. I grew up in the land too. Not all my life, but a good part of it. I know the dangers out there. I know what it takes to survive the hardships that you're going to face out there. And you learn from stories that people tell you, even hunting stories like that. The different types of hunting stories my dad told me when he was growing up. He was born in 1935. You know, he was alive when Second World War had ended. And then in the 50s, the stuff he talked about, what he saw in his hunting life and being out in a land. He didn't know how to read or write. He was raised out in a bush. When you talk about authentic, inherent teachings, to me, tell me if you have listeners out there, who do you know that was raised out in a land, that knows the land, that knows the animals and the plants? We don't have that today. Those elders are gone. We don't have elders today. We really don't. I got to see 2 elders in my lifetime, and they passed away. The last one passed away about 8 years ago. The other one passed away in the early 80s. His name was Frizzly Bear. He was a direct descendant of Big Bear. He was the nephew of Big Bear. And that old man, he was over 100 years old. When people went to visit him for cultural knowledge and prayers, in the end of his days, he couldn't move his arms, his legs. People would still go see him, and they would present him cloth and tobacco and bring their gifts. And then they would sit there by his bedside and tell them why they're there. Sometimes it's family problems, sometimes it's something else. They would sit there and tell him. And that old man would say, "Fill up the pipe for me. I'm going to say a prayer for you." So they did. They would fill it up, and they would always put it on his chest that he couldn't hold it, so the pipe was there, and he would say a prayer. And after he was done praying, he would tell them, "Light it up and put that pipe in my mouth. I'm going to smoke it now." So they did, and they would smoke it, and the next person, and so forth like that. That old man, his job was to help all of us. Even in his last days like that, I remember my dad talking about him. He saw the future, and he cried for all of us. Where we are today, he even talked about where we are right now. Everything is going to be so easy for you young people in the future, he said. Everything is going to be so easy. But one day it'll come where all that will end. That's when you're going to have a hard time. And that's when he would cry and talk about the future. And he used to ask Creator to save us because, we don't see that coming. People don't know that. And that elder used to cry and say a prayer for us because he saw that future, what was going to happen to us. And, when I do ceremonies now, I still acknowledge that elder and I ask him to come sit with us in the ceremony. Come help us. We still need you. I still think about all those elders that I had met that shared those incredible stories. I always used to think the pipe is the male, the sweetgrass is a male, the drum and the rattles are male. Creator put males only, I said to my mom. Isn't there a female drum? And she goes, yes, there is. How about a female rattle? There is one too. And there's even a female sweetgrass and a female rock. And then I was sitting there thinking, how come nobody ever acknowledges the female side? One day my mom was saying a prayer holding a pipe. She did everything the way the sun moves. And on her last pipe direction, she went the opposite. And I noticed that right away. It caught my eye. After she was done, she was putting away her bundle. And I asked her, you made a mistake. You went the opposite. Why did you do that? I said, that's against our cultural laws. And then she looks at me. I did not make a mistake. I have to respect Mother Earth too, she said. You see, Mother Earth goes counterclockwise. That's why the light goes this way. That's why when we go into ceremony, men on one side, women on one side. Men start over here because the sun begins there. Women start on this side because the Mother Earth begins there. That's why they sit opposite directions. But they're not really opposite. It's where the spirits begin. We have to follow that path. That's what it is. Should I stop? You got any questions?
Oh, it's a lot of really interesting knowledge. Thank you. Maybe you could share with the listeners why are stories only told in the wintertime?
Oh, that one. I even tested that to see if it's true. And boy, I shouldn't have done that. That's a mistake. Everything in this world, there's a spirit. There's even an echo spirit. When you sing, say if you sing in the mountains and you hear your echo carrying, there's an echo spirit. Creator didn't miss a beat, and when he made the universe and the planets, he put spirits in everything. Wisahijak stories need to be told in the winter time because that's when it's strongest. If you talk about it in the summertime, you're going to change the weather because Wisahijak, when he moves, the weather changes. When the spirits move, the weather changes. You ever drive down the highway and you see the snow kind of skimming on the highway? It's floating like that.
Mm-hmm.
That means the horse spirits are moving. That's why you feel that breeze of that wind traveling and it's carrying that snow just on top. Those are the horse spirits. Certain spirits in this world, when they move, they change the environment. But there's also a wind that is the boss. There's a boss wind. When Creator took his first breath like that, that's when the spirit of the wind came out. And it pushes the universe. That's why the universe is forever expanding and it travels faster than light, from what Einstein said. And that's true. When we do our pipe directions, we have to acknowledge that spirit too. We have to ask him to come pray. He's the boss of all the winds, and there's even a female wind. If you do, there's some people talking about why is the wind going the opposite like this? All the other tornadoes move this way, like counterclockwise. This one's moving the opposite, they said. Well, that's because it's a female wind. It has to respect the movement of Mother Earth, I told them. There's even female winds out there people don't acknowledge. Those spirits are very important. There has to be a balance in this world. Certain stories you talk about in the winter time because the thunderbirds are keepers of the law. There's even winter thunderbirds. They're the ones that keep an eye on the other spirits to make sure that when their movement is when it's time for them to make a movement, they're allowed by those thunderbird spirits and then they move. And when they move, they can cause heavy snowfall, heavy rain. They can change the environment. If you ask hunters, what kind of weather can the moose change? They'll tell you too. Some hunters, they know that. Like the best time, one time I was sitting outside with my dad. That pollen that flies around all over the place? That one was all over the place. I was look at all this pollen, I said. And then he looking around, yeah, it's the best time right now to go get the moose. That's when they're fattest, he said. And then he said, also the medicine, it's ready now, they said. This is the last chance you have to pick whatever medicines you need to pick. And it's true, if you go, the signs of the Mother Earth will tell you when it's time to hunt, when it's time to pick medicines too. Those different ones like that. So in the winter time, we're allowed to speak about creation stories, but Don't talk about them in the summertime because you'll change the weather. That isn't very friendly. Sometimes they become violent. There's good spirits that move out there. There's also bad spirits that exist. Then they move too. And when they move, they create kind of like violent windstorms, snow, blizzards, things like that. They're not very good. They create an environment where you'll have difficulty hunting and doing stuff around your yard, things like that. They don't want you to accomplish that. That's why they create that kind of environment.
Thank you. That's very interesting. What about, is there certain stories that only men can tell, or certain stories that only women can tell? Or does it not matter?
Most of the stories, the women and men, they can tell them. They're non-gender. When you say be sim, well, be suwak, when you say that, you're saying thunderbirds. You're not identifying her or him. That means they can tell. The only time when you're going to talk about his and her stories, if it's to do with a certain relationship with his and her, the laws behind sexuality, let me put it that way. There's Cree laws to do with sexuality. We have that. Certain elders would talk about those ones. Their grandmothers would talk about them, and grandfathers would talk to their grandkids about that. When they're coming of age, a certain age, when they hit puberty, the boys would be taken out into the bush, and their grandfather would tell them the laws are Cree laws. And the women would go stay, when they have their first period, they would go stay out in the bush with their grandma, and their grandma would be brutally honest with them about respecting their body. And the same with boys, about relationships and their body parts and the changes that they're going to go through and the laws behind it. All the laws behind it. Just like if the woman is having their first child, they're not allowed to eat certain male foods that do with like a moose, a bull moose, certain foods in that they can't eat. They're not allowed to look at violent movies on TV. They're not allowed to say certain words. And when the child grows up, they're not allowed to look at the moon too long because grandmother's spirit, that's her home. And when a child is 10 years old and you're looking and staring at the moon saying, oh, it's beautiful, grandmother's spirit looks down at that kid and says, oh, you want your womanhood early. That's why today our young girls, they're developing into their womanhood at a younger age because we're becoming lawless people. Our animals are still following the law, the plants are still following the law, but us, we're not following it no more. There are certain things that women are supposed to learn in their womanhood. So, that if you follow that, you're setting up your gene similar to the pipe, similar to the rattle, similar to the drum in our ceremonies. You're setting up your gene that way. If you break too many laws, that gene is going to change. They call that today intergenerational trauma, and science has found that to be true. You pass that gene on to your kids. That's why our kids today are having a hard time because we're passing down gene that is not the healthiest because we've done stuff that we're not supposed to do and we're not following Creator's law. Was there a remedy for it? Yes, there is. You have to reteach them about our Cree laws, have them involved in ceremony. The most important one that I saw was drinking medicine, the right kind of medicine. That can change your gene. There's a way to change it. When my grandmother died, I used to work with the Federal Institution. I was sitting in my office, and I was thinking about these guys. They get programs, they get, job skills, they get everything done. They got counseling, culture, How come they don't change? I was thinking. I was sitting in my office thinking about that. And this memory, this very old memory of my childhood came out. And I remember when my grandma died, when she was going to they were going to do an autopsy. My mom gathered us all up and put us in a car, and she drove fast to the hospital. And I asked her, how come we're going fast? Why are we rushing? And then she goes, because I got to tell the doctors not to do an autopsy on my mom. I go, why? Because she's afraid to break any laws that will affect you guys, she said. Oh, okay. As a kid, that was enough for me. But that day when I was sitting in that office, what laws was she afraid to break? And what is she really saying? So I began to do a little bit of research about intergenerational trauma and how you could pass that on. And then I realized, oh, that's what she was talking about. You see, in our culture, we're not allowed to have people cut our body. We're not allowed to do certain things with our body. That's a form of cannibalism. And when you do that, you're breaking the law, and you could pass that gene down to your kids. You know, on the seventh generation, our people will be stronger. If you ever heard elders say that, that's true, because our gene will change for the better by then. Because sometimes what happens is, you know, our warriors a long time ago, they had killed people. They took lives, they stole horses, they stole women, kids. They did stuff they weren't supposed to do with their culture. They broke Creator's laws, and that changes the gene. And now that atonement of carrying somebody else's mistakes for 7 generations has to be done by somebody. And we're the grandchildren for that. That's why they prayed so hard that, you know, that their prayer becomes remedy, that we don't have to carry so much of that. Does that make sense? Or is that
Yeah.
making you wonder more?
A little of both, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
You know, if you look at, in science, they call them electrons and atoms. Electrons, they say, emits light, like a little electricity, kind of like a eel. When they zap their predators that want to bite them, they zap them, they and kill them with the amount of electricity they have. That's what we carry too. And science is starting to find that those electrons possibly carry memory because the tests that they're doing. When I tell people, I'm going to sing a song to you, and I tried this in university. This is an old trick my mom taught me. I sat in a university with these law students. I was invited to go talk about Cree laws, so I did. And I told them we had a different style of education back then. And I'm going to try it on you. And this is how effective it is, I said. And I picked this white guy. He's about 23, 22. He was white as can be, a settler. And I sat in front of me, just in front of me. About 2 feet away, I put a chair there. And I asked him, have you ever listened to a round dance song? He goes, no. I've heard them, but I've never listened to them all the way. Have you ever sang an Indigenous song? He said, no. Okay, I'm going to teach you a song, and by the time I'm done teaching you, you will learn to sing like me, I said. And he just laughed at me. All the other students saw that. He was laughing. He didn't believe it. So I told him, okay, there's one thing I want you to do. I want you to put your hands on your legs and you listen to me. Not with your ears, not with your brain. But I want your whole body to listen to me because your whole body holds memory, I told him. I'm going to sing. And the only thing I want you to do is listen. I don't want you to sing in your head. Don't do that. That's one of the things I'm going to tell you. Don't sing with me. You're not allowed to sing with me. So I sang that song. It's that first time. Second time, I told him, keep that up. Third time I sang it, I told him, now you sing with me in your head. So he sang with me in his head. The fourth time, I told him, Now you try to sing with me. You hum it out, I told him. So I sang it, and he hummed it out. And on the fourth song, I told him, close your eyes now. Close your eyes. So he did that. Can you hear the song? He goes, yes, I can hear it. So I picked up the drum and I said, fifth song now. Now you're going to sing with me. So I started hitting the drum and I sang. And he was singing it exactly the way I taught him. On the fifth try, he did it. He had the biggest smile. That white boy had the biggest smile. He was Indian. He got up and he walked back towards his peers, and he had the biggest smile all the way. He was able to sing the way I sang it. You know, there's our education, the way our elders did it, you won't forget it. Something inside you, in your heart and your blood carries memory. You ever go to a round dance and you hear people hitting the drum and you start to get excited and you start to fidget? That's your ancestors that live through your blood veins in your blood. They're wanting to dance. They're getting excited because the vibration is the same vibration they felt when they were alive. And that's what they're wanting to experience more.
That's really cool. It's already been an hour.
Holy smokes. Oh
Yeah,
my
and
goodness.
it goes really fast. Is there anything that you want to say or anything that you were thinking of mentioning before we go?
You know, one thing I'll tell your listeners, if they're open to this, if you want to know your culture, listen to the creation stories and always go with an open mind and an open heart. You know, don't be like me. I had such a difficult time because I was a stubborn person. I always tried to put science thinking at first, and you know, if I hadn't done that, life would have been a little bit easier for me. Go with an open mind and open heart, because most of the time, the stories you're going to hear, they're true. I learned that in a way that was kind, and I'm so glad I learned the stuff. If you're going to learn your culture, listen to Nanabush stories, Wisahichak stories, and if you have Blackfoot people that are listening, call him Napi. Listen to Napi stories. All the stuff that, you know, all the ceremonies and everything that he left us began from there. That's where they all began from. And they evolved over time. Iksa.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Curtis. It's been a really amazing hour, and you're so knowledgeable. You really, I think, taught a lot of people a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time. So thank you so much for all of your time, all of your knowledge. I really appreciate you joining all of us today.
Oh, right on. Can you send me the link to this after?
I sure will. Yes,
Right
100%.
on. Thank you. Right on,
Yes.
Jessica.
Okay. Well, take care. It was so lovely. Have a wonderful night and take care, everybody listening. Bye.